James Troy pored over the pictures of the three men in front of him. Hofstadter he knew, and was not unhappy to see him gone. The German ambassador, of course, denied any knowledge of Hofstadter's actions or intentions, but he refused to press charges on Troy for murder of his assistant, since, of course, any autopsy would no doubt reveal the arsenic tablet he'd bitten on to kill himself. But he couldn't feel satisfied at that. James was now looking at the images of the two dead thugs who tailed him. Albert Himmler and Henry Fritz, both born in America to German immigrants. His first instinct was to do a thorough background check and find out what these men knew about the Nazis and their bombs. But the police didn't want him in on the investigation. Seeing as they were dead, they had nothing to tell him anyway. Worse still, the commissioner of the police had given him a call shortly after the crime scene had been established. He said, "Keep your snooping ass away from this if you know what's good for you." And now James didn't know if the office was being watched by the Germans or by the police themselves. "This just gets better by the goddamn minute," Troy hissed angrily, gritting his teeth and glaring at the photos of the two men, as if he could reach through the image and strangle them. And as he placed his fingers on the pictures to try out this very fantasy, there was a knock on the door, and Troy tried to recompose himself. Come in. Elizabeth walked in, her coat over a professional outfit that hugged her curves in a way that looked sensual but could scarcely compare to the gown she'd worn the night before. Troy still couldn't get her beauty out of his mind. He'd ordered her to take the next 2 days off and stay at her apartment so that she could recover, but it was mostly to put distance between him and her. His feelings for her were complicating things. "I thought you might be hungry. I brought some stew I made. I'm new at this, so it might not be best, but, nothing ventured, nothing gained." It was then that Troy noticed the stainless steel pot she was carrying. "I don't have any utensils to eat it with," Troy snapped, not looking up. "Well, then we'll use the empty coffee cups you never drink out of," Frost replied, setting the pot down. "It's a chicken stew made with corn kernels and—" "Go home, Elizabeth," Troy whispered harshly. Elizabeth paused and looked at James. "You need rest." "I got my rest, James. And I don't need it as much as you. When was the last time you slept anyway?" "Frost, the Nazis have a bomb, possibly multiple bombs, planted around the city. And they know that I'm onto them. They attempted to kill you to get me to quit, and now 3 of their number are dead. They're bound to be feeling pressure right now. We could be minutes away from a devastating strike on the USA homeland. Look, your concern is appreciated, but I'll sleep when I find that bomb. And you're a distraction that I can't afford." "I'm a distraction, am I?" Frost huffed. She looked insulted, but Troy knew her well enough to know that she hadn't taken it too seriously. "Well, maybe you need a second set of eyes on this, and even if you're not going to sleep, you at least need food." "What I need is peace and quiet. I need answers. I need a lead. Frost set down a white mug of the brothy chicken soup and then placed a dainty hand on James's shoulder, causing him to tense up. "James, you're worked up, and I get that. But you put too much pressure on yourself. You can't expect to know everything or have all the answers." She sighed, breathing gently at Rummiga's arm. Troy jerked his arm instinctively. "Don't patronize me." "It's not patronizing. It's the truth. Remember, truth? The night we met? You told me the truth. It's hard to hear sometimes. And here's the truth for you, James. You're one man. James Troy, you are not a mountain." Elizabeth explained. She walked behind him and placed her hands on both his shoulders and began to squeeze them in a massaging manner that made Troy's entire body shiver in reflex. He wanted to shake her off, to tell her to go back home and leave him to his work, but he just couldn't form the words. Her touch, her voice, and her beauty all froze him to the seat as he groaned in pleasure from her massage. "Now, care to tell me what's going on?" James glanced down at the picture on the desk. "These two. I need to know who the 2 punks who jumped me are. I've got names, but not background information, and the police aren't sharing," Troy answered. "The leech that died outside your dressing room, well, he'll have too much clout and close connections to leave a trail to follow, but these 2, I need a lead." Elizabeth leaned over his shoulder to look at the 2 pictures, her eyes narrowing as she glared. "These are the ones who attacked you? They don't look that tough to me." "Nah, they're not, until they've shoved a pair of brass knuckles in your gut," Troy groaned, rubbing the bruised spots he'd been hit. Elizabeth didn't laugh as she kept glaring at them. "What's wrong?"
"This guy right here." She pointed at the photo of Henry. "I've seen him before.
Troy shot a glance at Frost. Old boyfriend? Hardly. But when I was a singer at the nightclubs in town, I'd see him from time to time with his buddies, very loud and more than a little grabby. He had buddies. So these two might not have been alone. Other local krauts? Yeah, but problem is I don't know their names or how to reach out to them, so I don't know how that helps. Well, they frequented nightclubs together. Feel up to a little more singing? Troy was never a large fan of these evening clubs, and having to spend a lot of time in them was exhausting. The thick smell of cigarette smoke, the stench of booze on breath, and the unmistakable aroma of narcotics that would normally get the police busting down doors if the police chiefs themselves weren't the ones using them. It was never a very respectable scene, but it would be hypocritical of Troy to say he gravitated to the more high-class parts of the city all his life. Spending the last 2 weeks inside this club, sitting near the back and watching the performers, singers, and musicians perform, never really meant anything to him. But he would always wait for Frost's performance and wait for a signal from her. The plan was simple. Frost would sing and work the room, and if she saw the group of friends that hung out with Henry, she'd give a signal to Troy to move in. The wafting cigarettes that lifted and drifted along the ceiling like creeping serpents carried the beautiful singing voice of Frost as she sang yet another gorgeous cabaret single that both broke the heart and soul of every man in the room. Troy never was a fan of nightclubs, but Frost's voice was something he would never grow weary of. Like an angel with broken wings, her songs told of love lost, of hearts melted and shattered, of passionate romance and of missed chances for it. And every night he'd been here, he'd watched Frost like a dog from a window, and he never wanted so badly to approach her, to hold her. It was as if her voice drove him to madness with just a few simple words. And it was then Troy remembered what the old man told him in the park not so long ago. There's a lot of women in this city, kid. You can't round a corner without finding some dime a dozen dame. But that one, she's a gem. You take care of her, kid. A gem, Troy whispered to himself as Frost's voice carried to his soul, drawing forth tears he never knew he could shed. No, she was more than just a gem. She was a diamond whose glory was only accentuated when surrounded by the disgusting coal of this city. Maybe that's why she stood out so much in this disgusting nightclub. Suddenly, Frost stepped down from her stage, causing many men to whistle and get agitated, excited. But Troy was on alert. This was her signal. Frost promised if she saw the men they were looking for, she'd walk out to their table in the middle of one of her songs. Troy followed her sultry, swinging hips, and her eyes snapped up to him once or twice, verifying that he was paying attention before finally reaching near the back row of the left side of the club. There were 3 men there. All were white, tall, and burly. One had dirty clothing, like he'd come from a construction site, but the other 2 had on uniforms, like they belonged in some office on the more prosperous and respectable side of town. She leaned close and even gracefully moved her hips along the table, running her gloved fingers along the tablecloth, making the 3 men drool and practically reach for her like infants grasping for a mother's breasts. But Frost always stayed just out of reach, a mistress of seduction and teasing. She'd played this game before, and that both made Troy impressed and insanely jealous. But he had little time to feel this as he now had to make his own move. Frost got up and made her way back towards the stage, still singing and keeping the attention of the entire club on her body and her voice. While Troy approached the 3 men at the table and sat down beside them, they didn't look away but acknowledged Troy's arrival. "Ah, she's a vision," one whispered. "Like out of a dream." "She's something else, all right," Troy agreed honestly. "First time here?" another asked. Troy just shook his head. "I come every now and then, mostly for her." "Ah, you have good taste, friend," the man in the office uniform chuckled. "Name's Alex Burkhalter. That's a German name if I've ever heard one. I catch it on your voice, too," Troy pointed out with a smile. Elizabeth was finishing her song and slipping behind the curtain once more to the roar and applause of the crowd. Alex now had more time to talk to James and not stare at her ass. Family came here years ago. You?" "Born and raised here, actually, but I am familiar with a friend of yours. He was also German? Henry Fritz?" The name made the smile on Alex's face fade. "You know Henry?" "Look, if you're one of his new pals from..." "He's not my pal, Mr. Burkhalter." Troy leaned close and placed a hand on his weapon as he could see bringing up Henry had gotten Alex in a bad mood. "My name is James Troy, and I'm a private investigator. I'm investigating a major case. Your friend Henry, as well as 2 other Germans, attacked me and that singer who just left, Elizabeth Frost."
"Henry did that?"
"What's going on, Alex?" one of the other men asked, noticing that Alex was rather shocked.
"This man says Henry tried to kill him." "Fritz? Henry Fritz? Didn't think he'd hurt a fly."
"I got the scars to prove he can," James challenged. "Look, I think Henry was just a small fish in a bigger pond, and I need you to tell me what you know about him. You asked if I was one of his new pals. Who are his new pals?" Alex glanced at his friends, then coughed into his fist, slowly standing up, his eyes boring into Troy's.
"It's not that we do not want to talk, Inspector, but this is sensitive information, you understand. Henry was a friend. He was a former colleague. It would be in poor taste to speak of his private affairs."
"I'm not interested in what things he did behind counters unless they threaten the common good. I don't think you men realize just how deep in it he was. If you care about your friend and, even more, this country."
"This country?"
"Yes, this country, sir. I believe that Henry was involved in something that could threaten this city and this country. Will you help me?"
"Is there some place we could talk privately?" he asked. "I don't want to be heard talking about this."
Jane stood up and nodded. "You tell me everything you know, and I'll take you backstage to meet that lovely singer," James grinned, knowing a little incentive never hurt. Frost would forgive him later. But secretly there was a part of him who needed to see her too. Her voice still held an iron grip on his heart.